All right, one last bit of information here. We're going to the chapters on ancient Southeast Asia, and honestly, I'm just going to pick and choose here, given that we're so late in the semester. I want you to know how to identify a statue of Buddha and what the symbols associated with him mean, what the poses, gestures mean. I want you to know how to identify at least one Hindu god, and actually, I'll let our student presenter, talk about that. Um, but there are other images of Hindu gods and goddesses in the Philadelphia Museum of Art and actually the Penn Museum as well. And if you'd like to do your own research on them, I strongly encourage it. And then I want you to know what these Tang figurines are about. Okay, so I do need to begin with, who this Buddha is and what he stands for and why there is this system of beliefs now. Some people call it religion, called Buddhism. I'm hoping before you leave LaSalle that you you get some of this information in a religion or other class. Um, in any event, some facts here. Some people think Buddha was a man. His real name there. He comes from a wealthy family, but he rejected that wealth and became a monk. This, according to tradition. When he lived is a little unclear. The sources are all over the place, but in the BC period, some say 600. That's the most common, but others say later. Some say he lived a long time, and hence the confusion about the dates. The belief system he left behind is something that here you see in the Four Noble Truths, the bullets there. Probably you've heard of them, some of them, and articulated in different ways. Um, Everything is pain. The origin of pain is our desire, and if we extinguish our desire, then we can reach enlightenment. And in fact, the third bullet in this idea of enlightenment will probably be most useful here in this history of art class. Um, you probably know that he had followers of sorts called the Bodhisattvas, and they are beings who look a lot like Buddha actually in the representations, but they forego nirvana to stay here on earth and to let others help follow in his path. So now, very much like Christianity, in the beginning, in the BC years, the followers were really squeamish about showing this guy Buddha. So they often use symbols. So I'm showing you here it's actually a reliquary. It's like a building reliquary of Buddhist relics in India. And on it is in the doors, on one of the four doors is some sculptural work. And here are the symbols, some of the symbols of Buddha. One, it's the wheel, the wheel of, uh, the cyclical wheel of life. The lion, this has something to do with his family, but it stands in for Buddha. And then we have the Bodhi tree under which he is said, according to legend, to have received enlightenment. The other one I like is the footsteps. The other thing I should say, just before we leave this doorway that again belongs to the reliquary, stupa, it's called S-T-U-P-A, is the Buddhist reliquary, is that both Buddhist and Hindu art is very sensual, that there is a sense that in the practice of the religion or of the belief system, one uses one's body, and we see it sometimes translated in the way the art is depicted. So these are little kind of goddesses. There's a male version of this, and I want you to see that these, at least in her case, the sexuality of the figure is emphasized. Big breasts, showing the sex of this woman. And again, that will be true of a lot of Buddhist art, and again, we'll see it in Hindu art as well. But let's get back to this. Again, this idea that Buddhist statues initially from 600 to 500 to 400 to 200 BC, were were not showing Buddha, but then boom, by the first century AD, now we have tons of statues of Buddha. They've come upon a kind of formula. And this is what he looks like. And so I'm just going to talk about the parts and what they mean, and you can see them in in every statue of Buddha, I suspect. Starting at the head, he is often depicted with a halo. In fact, this is something that starts here with Buddhism, and people think migrate to Christianity later. He has on his head a bun, the bun of enlightenment. It's called a Ushnisha. His eyes are usually closed, and there is often a dot in the middle of his forehead called an urna, the third eye. Again, this also refers to his enlightenment. His eyes are closed, but he is able to see. Now, he's usually got big ears, and this really has something to do with his life story that, he was of a wealthy family before he gave up that material world, or at least shunned it. Um, and by shunned, I mean be indifferent to it. Not necessarily reject it, just be indifferent to it. Difference. That his big ears are a sign of his aristocracy, because all aristocrats wore heavy jewelry, earrings, and hence the earlobes got really big. So that's up there. He's also shown as a fairly fleshy body, often with the tummy showing the breath, which is important to Buddhist practice, meditation. And his hand gestures, and there are a variety, and I'm not even going to go through them, but these are called mudras, and they signify different things. So this is how the various Buddha statues are different. They have a different mudra. Sometimes it's blessing, sometimes it's forgiving, etc., things like that. Again, sometimes he's got his symbols here. Sometimes he sits, stands, he lies, whatever. He does many things, but sometimes his symbols are there, including the lion, and sometimes you see one of those bodhisattvas around him. So again, here's kind of the list of things. These are sort of mostly there all the time. These are sometimes, the last two bullets are sometimes there. So I'm going to just run through these slides quickly. You can stop on them and kind of just practice your understanding of these terms. There we go, 6th century from India, 9th century from India, etc. Now we're going to Afghanistan. He still looks kind of the same. Now to Java. Still the same, kind of. Oh, he's standing. Thailand. Okay, I might ask you that kind of stuff. I might ask you to unpack, decipher a statue of Buddha in the test. All right, I'm going to move very quickly to Hinduism, which, again, some people don't call a religion, but just a kind of set of, practices. And then generally again, a pathway to a spiritual goal. Also a belief in nirvana, this idea of enlightenment. And mainly, I guess what distinguishes it from Buddhism is this idea in karma, which you probably know about. And I've given a definition here. A kind of life is scorekeeping. Hinduism doesn't really have a figure like Buddha to figure, but there's a ton of gods and goddesses that come out of the traditions. So I'm going to rely again on our student presenter for 4:30 in the last class to talk about Siva. This is a male god. I know it looks very female because of the roundness of the body, but again, remember that both Buddhism and Hinduism express the human figure, represent the human figure in this, again, I think what we would call is kind of sexualized way, a very fleshy way. Lastly, the thing I'd like you to know, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm doing this to you, just little tidbits, but we're going to China, and then not so much associated with Buddhism or Hinduism, but just a practice of the emperors. And they had kind of like Egypt, they had lots of dynasties, a little more combative and than Egypt, and definitely an interest in progress in each of the dynasties having its own identity, which again is not Egyptian. But the Tang dynasty is known for its ceramics, developments in glazes for ceramics. And this Tang dynasty is from the 7th to 10th century. In their tombs, they would often put figures, human figures, animal figures are the ones I like the best, so that's what I'm going to deal with. And again, we're going to have a presentation from Caitlin on this. Um, the ceramic they used, so here you see a little horsey, and again, she will talk more about these. Aren't they just cute as all get out? I love the horses. Now. Very specifically, they used a type of clay body, which is called earthenware. It's kind of a gritty clay, but they use these wonderful glazes, and so they have an array of colors. Again, I suspect Caitlin will tell us about this. And specifically, they loved this kind of drip technique, applying the glaze. You apply the glaze and then you fire it up, and usually that glaze changes color a bit. But for them, the aesthetic was not to paint within the within the numbers, but to allow the again the glaze to kind of drip. The idea essentially is capturing this notion of process, and there are other dynasties, Chinese dynasties, that also in which artists who have a really extraordinary place as intellectuals in the court of the emperor, where they improve their practice. And for them, often, it's a very contemporary idea, for them, the practice of making art, the process of making art is in some ways more important than the product. Again, this is a very, in the Western world here, this is a very contemporary idea, but we see it again in these very early years in Imperial China. And so I'm showing you some of their scroll painting. These are silk, long sheets of silk, which they use brush, dipped in ink, sometimes colored inks, to create these wonderful landscapes. And these landscapes utilize different strokes to capture, again, different things going on in the landscapes. Sort of these evergreen trees, and again the smokiness that it kind of separates the composition here, the two valleys between one large mountain and one closer mountain, craggy range. And so again, this like kind of real fascination with brushstroke and process and placing things on the silk. Here's another one, and yeah, another thing in the aesthetic is again this separation of forms using in the landscape, using in some ways the visual fuzziness, the smoke, the smog, to keep those entities separate. But probably the most interesting manifestation of this like fascination with the process of making art are the Zen Buddhists. You probably know what Zen Buddhism is. It's kind of where you're meditating, but all of a sudden there's this spontaneous breakthrough to enlightenment. It's not sort of it's not slow. So Zen Buddhists believe in that kind of fast. I'm sorry, not fast, but sudden breakthrough, and they capture that. The artists capture that in their drawings. So they will just begin. They'll just take the brush right to paper and sort of make a mark, and then have to go back and after that breakthrough have to go back and make that mark into an image. So some of these Zen Buddhist painters create really, really funny images. This one a little less funny, but nonetheless you can see sort of the spontaneity of the way that this artist has put brush to paper.